All right, so when Mazzer dropped this grinder, the Philos, I think it caught nearly everybody by surprise. Finding a single dose coffee grinder that's really good at both espresso and filter is kind of like trying to find a unicorn. Like, you think you found one, and then once you actually start using it, you find out it's either really good at filter or really good at espresso and kind of like mediocre on whatever the other one is. The Philos takes a swing at this segment of grinders, and kind of shockingly, it does really well. And not only that, it does it at a very aggressive price at less than 1,000 euros. Right now, that's about $1,100 US. Now, that is a lot of money, but for how well this grinder works, there's not a lot out there that is matching it dollar for dollar. Now I have two of them, one in black, one in the other color, silver. Full disclosure, both of them were sent to me by Mazzer. This one back here was their pre-production unit, and I have a video where I gave my first impressions on it right over here. And this one is the full production model. Now we're gonna go all the way down the rabbit hole here, but first let's just take a really quick overview of how this grinder works. This is a single dosing grinder, meaning you weigh out and grind one serving of coffee at a time, and it's positioned for like the higher end home market or the light commercial market. You take your beans and you lift up the lid and you put them up here like this, put the lid back on. It's got a adjustment mechanism on the back here. Well, you set that to whatever you want to grind. You turn the grinder on, then open this little gate here. The beans fall into the pre-breaking chamber and then go back to the burrs where they're ground up and fall into this little cup. It's got this knocker right here so you can get out any last little bit of retention, and then you're left with these wonderfully fluffy, clump-free coffee grounds. There are two burr options. One is what's called their I200Ds, and that's a higher clarity burr set, brand new burr set from Mazzer. And then there's a set called the I189s, and these burrs are designed for a little bit more traditional espresso. More on the burrs in a second, but first, let's make an espresso. All right, so this is a natural Ethiopian from Hatch. And right off the bat, I'm getting a lot of peach. A nice sweet acidity on that. Good flavor separation, velvety mouthfeel. That is a very nice espresso. I have the 200Ds loaded in here right now, and I really find that they excel in the medium to light roast coffees, and that's what Mazzer says as well. And they just really well represent a nice coffee. So that is fantastic. All right, so from my perspective, there are kind of four things that are really going to set this grinder apart in the landscape of other grinders that are out there. Number one is retention. Number two is alignment. Both of those are kind of more technical things. The third is the taste profile of the burrs that you can get with this grinder. And the fourth, I'm going to leave that for later. Now, retention is the amount of coffee grounds that are retained inside a grinder once you're finished grinding. And this is pretty important for single dosing grinders because as you're going from, filter to espresso, you don't want any of those espresso grounds making it into your next filter cup of coffee or vice versa. That can really mess things up. So you want to get that number as low as possible. And the retention on this grinder is crazy low. I was measuring, typically between 0.0 and 0.1 grams of retention, which is very high performance from a retention standpoint. And often the most significant amount of retention of that already small number was just kind of stuck up in here in the chute. And you can get that out even with this little doohickey, they call it dose finisher in here, that you just kind of put up into the chute and you twist it around, pull it back out. And these little teeth on here are going to turn around inside the openings of the exit chute to get any extraneous grounds kind of out of there. But you can see that is not a huge amount of coffee. And when you actually open it up and get into there and look inside, which we're going to do shortly, it's a very minimal amount of coffee that gets retained in here. So as you're considering a grinder to go from one type of coffee filter to espresso and back and forth, that's something you really want to look for, and this grinder performs very well in that regard. Also, to help with retention, this cup is metal and it actually gets grounded by this metal plate right here and this kind of arm that comes down here. It's magnetic too, and that helps keep any extraneous static and mess down as the grinds are falling out into the chute, which also is really helpful. I did not have any issues flipping back and forth on this grinder, one cup to the next from filter to espresso and vice versa. Still, when I would, typically what I would do is run a couple grams of beans through on my new grind setting or new coffee, just to make sure that it was 100% clear. But I think that actually has a little bit more to do with my personality than the performance of the grinder, so take that for what it's worth. Let's talk about the second thing, alignment. And this is something that Mazzer has been absolutely obsessed with on this grinder, and this is one of the very best aligned grinders that I have used or tested. So if this is your first time hearing about alignment as it pertains to coffee grinders, in a grinder like this, there are two flat discs that are actually the cutting surfaces that one of them will rotate, and that is actually how the beans get ground up, is by passing through these two discs. And alignment, there are different types, but the kind that I'm going to talk about right now has to do with how parallel these two discs are, and you want them to be as close as possible, you know, just like that. And as they get very close together, you want them to be just perfectly aligned, as opposed to something like this, where if it's rotating and it's kind of tilted like that, you're going to get bigger grind particles coming out of the bottom than you get coming out of this side here, where it's a little tighter. And the more parallel you can get them, the better your particle size distribution is going to be. Makes for better coffee, better clarity in your cups. It's a good thing. Now, when I'm testing grinder alignment, I'll do a couple different types of tests. One of them is a wipe test, where basically I put marker around the edge and then put the burrs closer together until they just touch, and then take them apart and look at how the marker has been wiped off. And in that test, both grinders had basically a perfect wipe on both Burr sides, and that is extremely rare. The other type of test I do is I test how much distance is there between that point where the burrs first start to touch and you just hear that difference in pitch, to the point where you keep turning and it's a soft lock and they don't actually move anymore. Mazzer's tolerance when it comes to alignment is between 10 and 20 microns. And as I was picking their brain about this, they actually sent me a video of how they test this in the factory. Now, the first one that I got was just outside of that spec. I had measured that at about 24 microns from chirp to lock. This one slid in right on Mazzer's spec at just under 3 steps, which is between 15 to 18 microns, somewhere in there. That is really good alignment on both. To put it in perspective, the next closest aligned grinder that I've used was the Bentwood V63, and I got that one to between, 30-ish microns, and that was after shimming the burrs. Their original prototype, which is technically out of spec compared to the production models now, is out of the box better aligned than that grinder was after I aligned it. And both grinders were able to keep that alignment even after several burr changes. Now, the best aligned grinder that I've used is the Zerno Z1, which is right back there. And that grinder was in between 5 and 10 microns between burr chirp to burr lock. Now, those grinders are made in a lot less volume and are also more expensive than the Philos. More on the Z1s later. Also, the fact that the grind adjustment is on the back here really serves to help maintain that alignment, because the whole motor housing and burr is kind of all shifting forward together and backward. It's all locked in rather than having an adjustment mechanism on the top where it's just kind of moving a portion of the housing. Third big factor, the taste profile of the burrs inside this grinder. Historically, Mazzer has been known for very traditional style of espresso profile, thick, heavy body, dark chocolate. These burrs, on the other hand, are really more tailored to like medium to light roasts, more modern style of espresso, lots of flavor separation. And they really do a great job Now, they look a lot like a burr that has gotten a lot of hype in the last couple of years, and that burr is called the SSP MP V2. These are really high clarity burrs that kind of came into vogue for filter coffee and turbo espressos. And in my opinion, despite the hype that they get, they are extremely like clinical in their profile and not always the most enjoyable to use for everyday brewing. These burrs definitely, by appearance anyway, take some inspiration from the MPs. You know, you have those long, straight finishing teeth, no pre-breaking teeth, but they are different as well. If you look at the shape, you can see the 200s are more scooped in the way that they're made, whereas the MPs are flat, kind of straight teeth. And the taste profile, to me anyways, is more enjoyable than the MPs. It's a little bit better rounded. You still are getting a lot of flavor separation, a lot of clarity, but with a little bit more sweetness and a velvety kind of mouthfeel going on. It kind of slides in somewhere between the SSP MP and SSP HU. And on top of being really enjoyable, they also are a lot cheaper than the SSP line of burrs. Now the 189s, the other burr set that is available with this grinder that you can kind of opt into getting, they are a little bit better suited to, you know, traditional style of espresso, medium to dark roast coffees. They will be a little bit more flattering on those types of coffees in my experience. And also they will help the coffee kind of punch through the milk in a milk drink in a way that I was finding the 200s didn't really do in the same way, especially on medium to darker roasts. The 189s, however, I didn't find that the experience on filter was as good as the 200s for sure. Now, just a quick note, I did get both burr sets obviously, and when I went to switch the burr sets, I found I needed to adjust the 0 point. That's because the 189s are slightly thicker than the 200s. And just in general, from a calibration standpoint, when I got the grinder, it was set with about 10 steps buffer behind the 0 point before you would actually get to a burr chirp. Just a quick note there for you burr people out there. Now, as far as filter coffee goes, I think we should probably just make one. Now, usually when a grinder will give you a really good cup of espresso, you can generally tend to expect a little bit less on filter. On this grinder, I also found that I really enjoyed the filter cups. This is the same natural Ethiopian from Hatch. Peach jumping right to the forefront. Very clear, but it's not like clinically or unpleasantly clear. Good separation, nice, like just enough of a silky mouthfeel to make you feel like you got something there, and a very well-represented cup of coffee overall. That is something in one burr set that is pretty unique. Now, contributing to the performance of those 200D burrs is this massive pre-breaker inside. In my first video, I called it a pre-demolisher, and that is a really accurate description of what is going on in there. Typically, we'll see a pre-breaker used to kind of break up the beans a little bit before they get all jammed up against the burrs. It helps with particle size distribution, helps slow the feed rate down going into a burr set. Typically, they work by crushing the beans against the side of a chamber. In this grinder, it just works by smashing into them and demolishing them with this blunt force trauma type vibe that really, when you watch it in slow motion, it is kind of entertaining to see. It's a very unique approach, and I haven't seen it used elsewhere. And transparently, I love seeing innovation like that. And as far as results, I think that they are present in the cup in a good way. Okay, a couple other quick test results for all you geeks out there. This is a very fast grinder. It takes me just under 10 seconds to grind an 18-gram shot of espresso, and to do like a 16-gram filter dose, it was under 5 seconds. So very quick. Now, as far as sound, I wouldn't say it's quiet. You know, it comes in at just under 80 decibels, but it's certainly not ear splitting either, like some grinders. Now, the North American version of the prototype back there had quite this low frequency hum due to operating at 60 hertz power. This one, that has really been minimized for the production version. Now, as far as fidelity goes on espresso, that's kind of how much precision you have when you're making an adjustment. I was finding between each step on the grinder, which is about 6 microns, I would get between 2 seconds and on the very top end about 5 seconds of shot time variation. So that's perfectly acceptable. On this unit, I've actually made the conversion to stepless, which is a procedure that Mazzer offers. And it's a little intimidating if you've never done something like that before, but once you've done it once, it's not really a big deal. And that means you can kind of just tweak it, you know, with infinite adjustability. So if you want to adjust it between 2 steps, you can do that. Retention, as I mentioned, is in around 0.1 grams or less, which is fantastic. As far as cleaning goes, it's pretty quick to clean. You just pop this front thing off. It's magnetic. You undo these 2 wing nuts, which is probably the least satisfying feeling part of the whole experience. And then once those are loose, you just pull back on this and the front slides off. And you can see there's a very, very minimal amount of coffee stuck in here. Then once you put it all back together, because the grind size adjustment is on the back, you haven't messed up your grind size. So you can go right back to grinding wherever you were at before, even if it was espresso. And that again is going to contribute to better alignment of the grinder overall as well. Okay, so the grinder has a lot going for it. What does it not have going for it? Well, let's start with that adjustment mechanism in the back. That is something that freaked a lot of people out when they first saw the design of the grinder when Mazzer revealed it. And I have to say, you know, I've moved them around different places. In most settings, it's not as bad as you would think. You can easily adjust it with one hand. The production model is a lot less stiff and more fluid than the prototype that I had. It's very easy to make simple adjustments just with an easy grip on the dial. Seeing the dial settings is something that's not really difficult anytime you're kind of standing at a normal counter. If your cabinets are extremely low, it might be a little bit tricky. The one spot in here that I have actually found it was a little bit awkward was jammed back into that corner where the key and the Z1 are. In that type of a setting, it is kind of a little tricky to reach around and make a dial adjustment. I've seen some people put them sideways in their setup. That's a look that I don't totally go for, but the people who do it really swear by it, that it's a very natural workflow. I think that that is going to be a bit of a personal thing. Number 2 is size. This is a big grinder compared to other 64mm grinders. And with that size comes a big presence. It may feel a little bit out of place depending on the kitchen setup that you have. If you're in a very small, tight kitchen, you might not feel like you have the right spot for it, or it might feel a little oversized in your space. Popcorning is definitely an issue as well. So, you know, if you're not using this cap here and you open this gate to let the beans in and then you don't close it again right away, because that pre-breaker is just like flying around in there, it is going to pop beans out. And that's one of the more design-oriented negatives of this grinder from my perspective. And speaking about this cap, you know, it's plastic. There are several plastic parts on this grinder. Besides the cap, you have the power switch, you have this bottom panel right here, you have the knocker, which is also plastic. A lot of the things that you are going to be touching or cleaning when it comes to this grinder are plastic. And at €1,000, or whatever the equivalent is to your local currency, that may or may not be something that you want to deal with. A couple other really minor things. The power cord is not detachable, so while you can kind of coil it up inside the grinder to shorten it, you're stuck with this gray looking power cable, which may or may not stand out depending on your kitchen setup. And this plate down here, this metal plate that the grind cup kind of sits on, it is metal on metal and it does get scratched over time. Now Mazzer is planning on making that available as a replacement part, but it just is gonna be a wear point on this grinder. Overall though, at its price point of €1,000, that is a very long list of pros and not a huge list of cons. A lot of people end up comparing this grinder to the P64 and the Z1. Now, was the Z1 better aligned, smaller footprint, less plastic? Yes, and it also has a blind burr option, which is nice, but the Philos is offered for less, and it really does offer great grind quality for both filter and espresso. Which leads me to the last thing that this grinder really has going for it, and that is Mazzer's scale. If you want to order something like a Z1, you need to jump on a waiting list and then be patient as their team assembles these grinders one at a time in a very small factory in the US. Mazzer is a huge manufacturer with a very well-established set of factories, and they came out of the gate offering the Philos at scale. It's available in Europe right now. It's going to be available in North America before long, and once it's available worldwide, if you want one, you can just go and buy one. You don't need to wait around. They'll ship it to you and you have it. They have a large assembly line, and they've cleverly engineered this grinder to be produced with very tight alignment tolerances in very large numbers. And all of that together is in and of itself a bit of an edge. Once you add on to that the positioning of the i200D Burr set, the retention, the flexibility for flipping back between filter and espresso, it's definitely a compelling option in today's landscape. So at this point, I think I want to hear what you think about the Mazzer Philos. Is this going to be your next endgame grinder, or do you have your heart set on something else for some reason? I would love to hear from you in either case. And if you find my videos helpful, subscribe to my channel. It's a free and easy way that you can support me making these videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.